I think it's pretty egregious what's been happening to us the last few games. A minus 31 free throw discrepancy. And I might be able to understand it if we were...
The Indiana Fever versus the Las Vegas Aces isn't just a WNBA playoff battle. It's a war for basketball's soul. A clash where every dribble, every whistle, and every possession feels like part of a bigger conspiracy unfolding live on national television. From the opening tip of Game 1, the narrative wasn't just about two teams fighting for a spot in the finals. It was about a small market team daring to challenge the league's crown powerhouse and the forces determined to protect that powerhouse at any cost. When Indiana shocked the world by stealing Game 1 on the road, it wasn't just an upset, it was a message. A message that this young Fever squad, led by grit, toughness, and sheer heart, could stand toe-to-toe with the reigning champions. But that brief moment of triumph came with consequences, because from that point forward, everything about this series changed. The Aces didn't simply come back swinging with better execution or smarter strategy. They came back with something far more dangerous, the unwavering support of referees whose whistles turned competitive KPLL into a lopsided spectacle. The strong start from Indiana was met with not just resistance from Vegas, but what felt like orchestrated intervention, making it clear to everyone watching that the Fever weren't just facing 5 players on the court. They were facing the weight of the league itself. As the series shifted to Gainbridge Fieldhouse, fans could feel the tension building. But no one expected the imbalance that would follow. In Game 2, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Vegas, unable to generate consistent offensive rhythm, relied almost entirely on trips to the free throw line to stay afloat. Meanwhile, Indiana's clean, physical defense, the very foundation of their success, was somehow magically transformed into foul trouble whenever it suited the officials. Elbows thrown by Aces players. No whistle. Fever defenders boxing out legally. Immediate foul call. The double standard wasn't subtle. It screamed at anyone who paid attention. The box score confirmed what everyone in the arena already knew. This wasn't basketball. It was manipulation. Social media erupted with clips dissecting the blown calls in real time, with analysts and fans pointing out how Indiana was being systematically punished for playing hard-nosed defense, while Vegas was rewarded for flopping and cheap shots. Stephanie White, Indiana's head coach, wasn't about to sit back quietly. In one of the most emotional post-game interviews of her career, she delivered a blistering statement demanding nothing less than a full-scale investigation into WNBA officiating. Her voice cracked as she spoke, not just with anger, but with the frustration of a leader watching her players get robbed of the stage they'd fought so hard to earn. White's words weren't just a coach's complaint, they were a declaration of war against a system that seemed determined to crush the Fever's spirit before their story could even be told. But here's the real tragedy. Those phantom whistles didn't just hand Vegas wins they didn't earn. They overshadowed the very thing that made this Fever team so special: their resilience, their grit, and their refusal to quit. Game after game, Indiana's players poured everything they had into the fight. They dove for loose balls, battled through injuries, and executed their game plan with precision, only to see their efforts erased by a single blown call. Aaliyah Boston, the team's anchor, faced double and triple teams while somehow still managing to contain Aja Wilson, who spent most of Game 3 shooting bricks from mid-range rather than attacking the paint. Boston's elite defense forced Wilson into an abysmal shooting night. But you wouldn't know it from the media coverage, which bent over backward to protect Wilson's reputation while ignoring Boston's brilliance. And then came the breaking point, a third-quarter sequence in Game 3 that encapsulated the entire series. Boston was whistled for a questionable foul on Jackie Young, and Stephanie White immediately signaled for a challenge. The bench was ready, the fans were on their feet, and everyone waited for the review that never came. The officials flat out refused to acknowledge the challenge. And moments later, Chelsea Gray buried a dagger three-pointer that flipped the game's momentum completely. The Gainbridge crowd erupted, not in celebration, but in fury, their cheers turning to boos that shook the building. Clips of the sequence spread like wildfire online, sparking debates, outrage, and accusations of outright rigging. It was in that moment, as Indiana's hard-earned lead was ripped away by a call they weren't even allowed to review, that fans realized this series wasn't being decided by players, it was being decided by referees and the invisible forces behind them. By the time Game 3 rolled around, this wasn't just a playoff series anymore. It was a battlefield where every possession felt rigged. Every whistle felt predetermined, and every Fever rally was met with an invisible hand pushing them back down. The bias wasn't creeping in subtly. It was storming through the doors and dictating the pace of the game with ruthless precision. What unfolded inside Gainbridge Fieldhouse wasn't a fair fight. It was an orchestrated display of favoritism, so blatant that even neutral fans were left stunned. The Fever weren't just playing against the Las Vegas Aces, they were battling a second opponent wearing stripes. From the opening tip, you could feel the tension in the air. A collective unease hanging over the crowd like a storm cloud ready to burst. And burst it did. Early in the third quarter, a sequence unfolded that will go down as one of the most controversial in WNBA playoff history. Aaliyah Boston, Indiana's defensive anchor and emotional leader, was called for a soft foul against Jackie Young, a call that stunned everyone in the arena. Stephanie White instantly motioned for a challenge, her frustration boiling over as she pleaded with officials to review the play. The Fever bench was ready, the crowd was roaring for justice. And yet the referees did something almost unthinkable. They flat out ignored her. Seconds later, Chelsea Gray calmly buried a three-pointer, turning what should have been Indiana's defensive stand into a Vegas momentum swing. That single moment didn't just shift the scoreboard. It shattered the illusion that this game was being played on a level court, exposing the ugly truth for all to see. The clips of that play spread across social media within minutes, igniting a firestorm of outrage. Fans, analysts, and even former players took to platforms like X and Instagram to break down the footage frame by frame. The evidence was damning. Not only had Boston been called for a questionable foul, but multiple replays revealed that Vegas players had been getting away with elbows, shoves, and outright undercuts throughout the game with zero consequences. The commentary was brutal. A'ja Wilson bulldozing through, Boston with her shoulder lowered like a football fullback, no whistle. Jackie Young shoving defenders aside on drives, play on. Meanwhile, the moment a Fever player so much as grazed a jersey, the whistle blew as if a crime had been committed. This wasn't oversight. This wasn't a few missed calls in the heat of battle. This was a pattern, deliberate and sustained, that tilted the entire series in one direction. Analysts highlighted sequences where Fever defenders were literally thrown to the ground without a single foul being called, only for Indiana to be penalized seconds later for light contact. The imbalance was staggering. And the numbers told the same story. A -31 free throw discrepancy across just a few games. That kind of gap isn't normal, not at this level, and it certainly doesn't happen by accident. The message was clear. Vegas wasn't winning through superior play. They were being handed lifelines by referees determined to protect the league's reigning champions. And yet, through all of this, Indiana refused to break. Lesser teams would have folded under the weight of such blatant bias. Most players would have hung their heads, muttered about unfairness, and mentally checked out. But not the Fever. They kept fighting, kept clawing, kept pushing back against a system stacked against them. No player embodied that defiance more than Lexi Hall, coming off a painful back injury suffered in Game 1. Hall wasn't even expected to play significant minutes. Her warm-ups were stiff, her movements tentative, and it looked like she'd serve only as a brief placeholder to give her teammates a breather. Instead, she turned the night into a showcase of courage and willpower that fans will remember long after the final buzzer. Despite being listed as questionable, Hull delivered the performance of her life. 16 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. All while shooting 6 of 10 from the field and draining 3 massive three-pointers. Each shot felt like a jolt of electricity, reviving Indiana every time Vegas threatened to pull away. Her 8 total threes across 2 games tied a Fever playoff record. A feat made even more remarkable by the fact she was playing through obvious pain. Cameras caught her grimacing after collisions, clutching her back after hard falls, but she never asked out, never gave in. She dove for loose balls, wrestled for rebounds, and sacrificed her body possession after possession. Every time the officials tried to drain Indiana's energy with phantom calls. Relentless hustle pumped life back into the team, proving that heart can't be officiated away. But here's what makes it all so bitter on the very night Hull delivered her career-defining performance. The conversation wasn't about her courage or her stats. It wasn't about the 16 points she scored through sheer determination, or the 10 rebounds she ripped away from taller, healthier opponents. No, the spotlight was stolen yet again by controversy. The narrative shifted away from Indiana's fight and back onto the officiating circus that had consumed the series. Even when the Fever gave fans something pure to celebrate, the league's failures loomed too large to ignore. A'ja Wilson, hailed as the league's MVP and the face of the Aces, spent most of Game 3 shooting blanks. She opened the night with a single confident three-pointer and then proceeded to miss 11 straight shots, finishing just 6 for 20 from the field with a measly 13 points. By any objective standard, it was a dreadful performance, the kind of outing that would earn criticism for even a rookie, let alone a reigning MVP. And yet, thanks to the constant whistles and favorable calls, Vegas didn't need Wilson to play like a superstar. Jackie Young's 25 points, Chelsea Gray's steady 15, and Melissa Smith's timely contributions were enough to carry them across the finish line. With the referees providing just the right amount of help whenever Indiana threatened to take control, the final minutes were a blur of questionable fouls, missed reviews, and mounting frustration. As a 6-point Fever lead evaporated under a tidal wave of officiating blunders. By the time the buzzer sounded, it was clear to everyone watching that this wasn't a game decided by talent or execution. It was a game decided by those holding the whistles. And Indiana never stood a chance. This wasn't just another tough loss for the Indiana Fever. It was the breaking point. The moment where frustration boiled over and could no longer be contained. Stephanie White, a coach known for her composure and professionalism, finally snapped under the weight of what she had witnessed throughout the series. She didn't just hint at frustration or use vague language like so many coaches do in post-game interviews. No, she came out swinging with a direct and fiery demand for change, calling for nothing less than a full-scale investigation into WNBA officiating. White's voice trembled, not from fear, but from pure anger as she detailed the staggering -31 free throw discrepancy that had defined the series. She made it clear that this wasn't about her team missing shots or failing to execute. It was about being denied a fair fight. "We're attacking the rim. We're not just chucking threes," she said, her tone sharp and unrelenting. The implication was crystal clear. Indiana had earned their chances. But those chances were ripped away by referees who seemed determined to tilt the scales. It wasn't just bad officiating, it was a betrayal of the very integrity of the game. White's words echoed through the press room and across social media like a thunderclap, shattering any illusions that this was business as usual. The visual evidence backed her up. Clips from the series had already gone viral, dissected frame by frame by angry fans and analysts who refused to stay silent. One video showed A'ja Wilson blatantly shoving Nolessa Howard in the back without a whistle, only for Howard to be called seconds later for barely touching Wilson. Another showed Aaliyah Boston absorbing contact at the rim with no call, while Wilson was awarded free throws for far less. The most infuriating footage came from Game 3, where Stephanie White was visibly signaling for a challenge as Boston was whistled for a crucial foul, only for officials to blatantly ignore her. That missed review wasn't just incompetence, it felt intentional. Seconds later, Chelsea Gray buried a three-pointer, flipping the momentum of the entire game. Clips of the sequence spread like wildfire, with captions like "rigged" and "shameful" trending across platforms. Fans didn't need a rule book to see what was happening. They could see it in Wilson's lowered shoulders, in the elbows flying under the basket, in the Fever players sprawled on the hardwood after uncalled shoves. Meanwhile, every time an Indiana player so much as brushed a jersey, the whistle blew with the urgency of a fire alarm. It was a double standard so blatant it couldn't be denied, a pattern of bias that stripped the game of its credibility. And yet, through all of this chaos, the Fever's players never stopped fighting. Aaliyah Boston anchored the defense with relentless effort, holding Wilson to one of the worst shooting nights of her career. Just 6 makes on 20 attempts. That's not a slump. That's elite defense executed perfectly. Boston walled off the paint, forced Wilson into awkward mid-range shots, and refused to give her an inch inside. But while Boston was battling in the trenches, the narrative outside the arena told a very different story. Instead of celebrating Boston's dominance, much of the media spun Wilson's performance into excuses, praising her all-round impact with mentions of a few rebounds, a block, and some assists. It was as if the box score had been rewritten to protect the league's poster child. Even more insulting was Becky Hammon's postgame complaint that Wilson had only shot 1 free throw in 38 minutes, conveniently ignoring the fact that the Aces as a whole had been living at the foul line all series long. The irony was almost laughable. The team benefiting most from officiating had the audacity to claim victimhood. Meanwhile, players like Lexi Hull and Kelsey Mitchell were literally putting their bodies on the line, battling through pain and pressure only to see their efforts erased by biased whistles. Hull's 16-point, 10-rebound masterpiece should have been the headline. Instead, it was buried beneath controversy, just like the Fever's fight had been buried beneath the league's favoritism. This wasn't just a loss on the scoreboard. It was a loss of trust, a gut punch to every player and fan who believes in the purity of competition. Stephanie White's demand for accountability wasn't just about her team, it was about the future of the league. The WNBA is experiencing unprecedented growth, fueled in large part by Caitlin Clark's arrival and the Fever's rise to relevance. Arenas are packed, TV ratings are smashing records, and new fans are pouring in every day. But with that growth comes responsibility, and the league's leadership has failed to meet the moment. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert's silence throughout this series has been deafening. While fans scream for fairness and players are visibly crushed by biased officiating, the league office sits quietly, hoping the storm will pass. White's words have made it clear, the storm isn't passing. Not this time. Her call for a public, transparent investigation has put Engelbert and the league on notice. Either they take action to restore credibility, or they risk losing the very foundation of their success. Because without the trust of the fans, without the belief that games are decided by skill rather than politics, this surge in popularity will crumble. Social media won't forget. The Gainbridge crowd won't forget. The players who sacrificed everything only to be robbed by corrupt officiating won't forget. And if nothing changes, the message to everyone watching is simple. The WNBA doesn't care about fairness. It only cares about protecting its chosen teams. Hook end. So here's the bottom line. This series wasn't just about wins and losses. It was about right and wrong. The Indiana Fever earned their place on this stage through heart, grit, and sheer determination, while the Las Vegas Aces were carried by whistles, flubs, and invisible hands pulling the strings. Stephanie White's fiery stand has ripped the curtain back, exposing the league's dirtiest secret for the world to see. The only question now is whether the WNBA has the courage to confront its own corruption. Will they investigate? Will they hold officials accountable? Or will they double down, protecting their brand while sacrificing their integrity? The answer will define not just the future of the Fever, but the future of women's basketball itself. Because if justice doesn't come, if this kind of manipulation continues, then every fan, every player, and every analyst will know the truth. The games they're watching aren't being decided on the court. They're being decided in the shadows, and the soul